Few new things we're going to look at today for AutoCAD. We're going to look at a few new functions. Last week we had trim and arcs. Yeah, we had trimmed arcs and some new snaps last week. So this week we're going to look at fillet, chamfer, and pattern slash array. Some programs will call it pattern, some will call it array, some programs will call it fillet, some will call it round. The idea is the same. The idea is we are going to take wait, I need to share screen. The idea is that some will the idea is that we take the corner, and then if we fillet around it, we're gonna make the corner round. If we chamfer it, then we're gonna make the corner like this. You cut off a corner. So the definitions for them, of course, for a fillet, obviously, since it's an arc, that means there's a center. And if there's a center, that means there's a radius. So it's pretty straightforward. You just have to find out where the arc is going to be, and then you just draw the arc. Give it a radius, and then give it a center. Of course, AutoCAD will do this for you automatically. In manual drawing, it's slightly more involved. But you can see straight away the idea here. These are tangents. It's a straight connection, smooth connection all the way. Next up is the chamfer. For a chamfer, you don't deal with radius because it's not a circular arc like this. You're dealing with distances. So you've got one distance here, and then you've got another distance here. So when you draw, when you create a chamfer in AutoCAD later, you'll see that AutoCAD asks for two distances, i.e. the distance here and the distance here. So most of the time it's going to be the same. So you may see things like chamfer 45 degree because this is at 45 degrees. So you may see some definitions of chamfers like that. Some will that define chamfers by distance law. So if it's the same distance, then of course it's 45. But then if it's not, maybe you want the chamfer to be steeper or more shallow, then you will have different distance 1 and different distance 2. Okay. After that, we're going to look at arrays. Oh, by the way, this is one way to dimension a chamfer, which is you add a multi-leader. This is not a dimension you will find. We have to add it ourselves, and then you just say C 3.5, meaning this distance here is 3.5. This distance here is 3.5. After that, we're going to look at arrays. Arrays are very good for copying patterns. Say, for example, you can take a circle like this, and then you can copy it, and that will be called a rectangular array. That means we go X and Y direction. We can also take a pattern, say for example, this pattern here or this entire section here. Then we pattern it in a circle. Pattern it in a circle like that. That's called a polar array. So we look at both. They're pretty straightforward. We look at both and how to do them. So as usual, we've got our AutoCAD here. Let's see. Okay, as usual, we're going to open a AutoCAD ISO drawing because we are drawing in millimeters. Let me just change the color. Right. So let's say we've got some line here, and then I'm just going to use this to make our fillet and our chamfer. So let me just draw a bit smaller. So we've got a corner here, and we want to apply a fillet to it. The fillet is found here. You've got fillet and chamfer both in the same location. You just have to click the little arrow. You can find fillet and chamfer. So let's do fillet first. It's pretty straightforward. What you do is you choose what you are going to fillet. In this case, it's this line here and then this line here. Then you'll find that nothing happens. Why? Because you can see at the bottom in the command bar, the radius is 0. So what we've essentially done is we've asked AutoCAD to make a fillet of 0, which that's why nothing happened. So when you fillet, you have to make sure that you change the radius first. So radius over here, How to change it? Multiple ways. The most straightforward is just to click on radius. On older versions, you would have to type radius to go into the next, yeah, to go into the radius changing portion. But here, newer versions, you can just click. And you can see specify fillet radius. In this case, we'll specify something. Let's say, I don't know, 2 or whatever radius is given to you. Then you just click. AutoCAD will do the fillet for you. Same for chamfer. Same idea. Before we choose what lines we want to chamfer, you can see here distance is 0, 0. So we need to change the distance first. Here we'll click on distance. And then we'll specify that chamfer distance. First chamfer distance, say here, this distance. Okay, I say it's 1. Enter. Second chamfer distance, also 1. Okay, enter. Then I'll choose the first line and the second line. And now we have our chamfer. So pretty straightforward. Arrays are used like this. All you have to do is start the array. You can see array up here. You click on array. I've chosen rectangular array, and I just select the object I want to copy. I'll select it, press enter, and by default, this is what comes out. And I can change it. I can either change it by pulling it up and down, but that doesn't give me a lot of control. I can control it more over here. Let's say I want to change the number of rows and columns. I change the settings up here, the distance and all that. Okay, so that's a rectangular array. A circular array, to do a circular array, you need to have a center, something for AutoCAD to copy around. Of course, you can just choose any old point, but we have a specific point we want to array around, so I draw a circle first. Now, polar array, you just select, press enter to tell AutoCAD I'm done selecting, and then you choose the center point of the array. To choose the center point, you need to move your cursor to the circumference, and then the center will appear. And you can see this one appears, and you can same lah. You can change whatever you like. Okay, one thing that may happen that you may encounter is that when you want to trim, because you can see later, not later, just now we saw our exercise, we have some trimming to do, right? You may encounter problems when you're trying to trim. Like you have stuff here you want to cut off and you try and trim it with in relation to the circle and it doesn't trim. That's because AutoCAD is trimming based on the relationship between objects. And so there's a bit of a confusion here because this circle is considered one object. But then when you select it, all the other circles are bound together with it. So it's like one object, but it's also many objects. And so the trim tends to go a bit crazy. What we need to do is we need to separate these circles into individual circles. So how do we do that? We are going to use the command explode. It's not something you will find. You have to type it out. So we'll type out explode, press enter, then we select the object we want to break apart. In this case, it's the array. I select it, then I press enter. Then now you can see they're all individual circles. So of course, it's a good idea to make sure that your array is the size you want it to be before you explode it. Otherwise, you have to do the array again. Or Control Z if you call it in early. So yeah, so that's fillets, chamfers, and then arrays. Next up, we're going to look at dimensions. So far, we haven't been doing dimensions. For this exercise, we need to do dimensions. Dimensions are over here. Annotations, they're called. Anywhere you want to add information, write them down, include information. They're called annotations. So text you're already familiar with. You've done a few. Here, dimensions, there are a few. The more common ones are, of course, linear, angular, radius, diameter. Now, of course, actually, all of them are common. But for our exercises, we're going to be doing linear most of the time. And then, of course, some radius and diameter. If you're wondering the difference between linear and aligned, okay, a linear dimension will always dimension based on the vertical or horizontal distance. So you can see here, vertical or horizontal distance. Whereas an aligned and align the dimension will just give you the distance that you selected. So this is useful for different situations. So now you see I've made a dimension. You can see it's really simple. You just click the dimension you want, then you just choose where you want to dimension. And by now you'll have noticed that we have a problem. The dimension is far too big. The dimension is bigger than the drawing, which is you end up with more dimensions than drawings, and your drawing becomes unreadable. So we need to make some changes. We need to change some settings. This here, this portion, the 4.6 or 4,6, this is the text. So we'll change the text later. Then there's going to be a gap between the dimension line and the text. So this one is called an offset. AutoCAD calls it offset, not gap. They call it offset. Okay. After that, we've got these lines here. These are the extension lines. Why are they called extension lines? It's because they extend from the origin. The origin being the point that we selected for the drawing, for the dimension. So that is the extension line. Uh, there's a gap here between the extension line and the origin. So that one also called an offset. So offset from the origin. You'll see a setting for it later. And obviously we've got the arrow which we need to change, and this decimal separator which we use period, not comma. So let's make those changes. How are we gonna change those settings? We go to the annotate tab, and then we go to the dimensions menu, and there's a little small arrow over here. You click on that at the bottom right corner, and you'll see the dimension style manager. Let's click on modify, and then first thing to do is to make the window as big as you can. This is because we've got a preview here and we want to see what's going on in the preview. Let's make those changes. First off, the text is too big, right? So let's make the text smaller. If we want to change the text, let's guess where it's going to be. The setting is going to be in text. Okay, very straightforward. All you need in AutoCAD is to be able to read. So we go to text. Then we see now text height is 2.5. So let's change it. Let's say it's, I don't know, let's say 1.5. Let's say it's 1.5. This will take a bit of tweaking when you do it first time. So let's say 1.5, and then okay, so the text has gotten smaller, maybe not small enough. I'll say 1. Okay, 1. Text height of 1. So now after text height of 1, I will probably need to change my arrow to be the same size as well. So I go to symbols and arrows. I change that to 1. All right. So now that that's happened, looks like the gap between the text and the dimension line is a bit too big. So maybe we'll change that to be smaller. And you can find the option here. Offset from dim line right now is 0.6. You can put anything you like, 0.3. Next up is the line. So two things here. The line here is extending beyond the dimension line, which is fine. Some people prefer it, some people don't. Let's say you don't prefer it. You want the line not to extend so much. So clearly the option for it would be in lines. Let's look at the settings. Save you a bit of reading is here at the bottom right corner. Extend beyond dim lines. Right now is 1.25. Let's say we change it something smaller. So you can see now it's not sticking up so much anymore. And finally, the offset from origin. Let's make it smaller. And that looks a little bit better. Maybe can be bigger. Okay. So with offset from origin, we have to be careful. We can't make it too big and can't make it too small. If the gap is too big, then you might have trouble trying to see where the dimension is pointing at, especially for more complex drawings with a lot of different features. So you can't have it too far away. If you have it too close until it's almost touching, then it's difficult to differentiate between the dimension line and the object. What's the dimension? What's the object? Sometimes the lines may just join up, then you just confuse your reader. And finally, here this comma, we're going to change that to period. That one is under primary units. We're going to change our decimal separator to period. Click OK, click close, and now our drawing is looking a little better. There we go. Could be smaller, I guess, but the size and all of that, with practice and experience, you be able to make better judgment whether something is the right size or not the right size. Multi-leader is something we will need for the chamfer. So multi-leader is right here. You just click how to use it, very simple. You just click on whatever point you want to dimension, and then you'll have to type it out. And then for this, of course, it has its own settings. So again, you click on the little small arrow. This time you have the multi-leader style manager. Click modify, same thing. Make it a little bigger so you can see the changes and mess around with the settings until you get a setting that is broadly similar to your dimensions. Okay, next up is layers. How to change the thickness of this dimension and object. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. If you click on layer properties, you can see we have by default, we've got 0 and depth points. So let's say I add a layer for dimensions. Dimensions over here, you can change all kinds of settings, like the color, the thickness, the type of the line. We're just going to look at line weights here. Line weight, you can see if you click on line weight, it's currently the default thickness. Line weight just means thickness. Default is 0.18. So that is you can take that as the thickness of the drawings. So let's say if this is 0.18, we can choose something smaller for our dimensions. Let's say something really small, 0 or 0.05. Doesn't matter. As long as it's much thinner than the drawing. So then now we've got a dimension and we've got a 0. Let's say we want to move these drawings into the dimension layer. How to do that? When we select something, we can see what layer it's currently in. You can see right now, it's currently in the 0 layer. Here at the top, you can see. If I want to change it, I just have to click on the arrow or the empty space, and I click on dim for dimension. And now this belongs in the dimension layer. So let's make that a bit clearer. I'll just change the color so it's easy to see the difference, what I mean. There we go. Whatever settings belong to that layer, once we move that object to that layer, the settings get applied to it automatically. So we just have to select something, change its layer. Okay, if we choose multiple things, you can see that the layer is empty, it is blank. That means that the objects we've selected belong in multiple layers. It's to save time because you don't want to be selecting something and then click that all the time 1,000,000 times. You can choose what the default layer is. So right now, if I select dim, that means nothing selected. I change the layer to dim. Whatever I draw will automatically be assigned to the dimension layer. If I switch back to the 0 layer or the drawing layer, then whatever I draw will be assigned to the 0 layer. So that's how you mess around with layers. And it's the same with depth points. So some of you are confused. What do we do with this thing? How do we make it disappear? Okay, you don't have to make it disappear. You just have to make sure that the viewport doesn't interfere with your title block. And then you move your title block into depth points layer. So you'll still see it in the layout. Before you print it, you'll still see it. But later on, when you print it, you'll see that the line has disappeared. All right. So don't move your drawings into depth points. Move your viewport into depth points. And these drawings will just don't mess around with the drawings. Don't change the drawing settings here. Drawing settings, you mess around here. Here, you're merely concerned with your title block and your viewport going into depth points. Okay,